And I want to thank you guys all for coming and sharing your lunchtime with us. Thank our fantastic speakers who I have asked to introduce themselves. And then we have some really great staff helping with behind the scenes. So thank you, Katie and Cassie. Just to get us started, just to mention that Watershed Protection Department, our mission is to deal with flooding, erosion, and water quality. So keeping our water clean is really important. We know that lawns can contribute to that problem and contribute to toxic algae in our water, which is obviously something that none of us want. So we decided to find some awesome speakers to talk about, one, if you do have a lawn, some, earthwise ways to take care of it. And then if you want to have some lawn alternatives, we wanted to give you some options for that. And I am going to turn it over to Dean Mancello. He is with the Tarrant County AgriLife Extension Office and has graciously agreed to help us out here in the Austin area. So Dean, I'm just going to turn off my mic and my camera and have you take it away.
As Denise said, my name is Dean Mancello. I am an extension program specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife, and I am located in the Dallas Center, and I'm with a group we call ourselves the Urban WISH program, which WISH stands for Water Innovation and Sustainability Hub. And my focus is mostly outdoor water use efficiency. So that's kind of where we're going to come from today with this presentation. So I got quite a bit of info, so let me get started. So I'm going to start off right away with kind of maybe a little bit of slap across the face for some folks, but turf grass is absolutely not the enemy. It's not the enemy at all. The way we treat it and the way we utilize it as people or humans, we're kind of the ones that are really causing a lot of the problems. What turf grass does, it does really well. It really does a great job of filtering out pollutants. It does a great job of keeping our temperatures down. It provides an awesome place for our kids and our dogs to play. But we kind of take advantage of its good nature and plant it in unlikely places. We over fertilize it, we overwater it, we over manage it. We do a lot of really bad things with it. So what I'm going to talk to you about is some ways that we can have a nice lawn, a practical lawn, and without damaging our rivers, creeks, and streams, because that lawns are a pretty significant contributor to eutrophication and a lot of other issues in our watersheds. So I work with a lot of different people in a lot of different situations. And what's kind of interesting is I might ask the group, how many people live in a watershed, and like nobody will raise their hand. So, because they don't even know, like a lot of people don't even know what a watershed is. So that's one thing we need to do, is we need to start doing a better job of educating people as far as watersheds. But so these are the topics that we're going to talk about here today. We're going to talk about lawn watering, we're going to talk about mowing, and we're going to talk about fertilizing, right? Because these are all important things. These are all important players for keeping a nice, healthy, happy lawn. And they're also all things that contribute to pollution, okay? They're all things that we tend to overdo or underdo. We don't seem to do them quite the way we should do them. So let's just jump right on in to our watering segment. So, and definitely if you have questions, throw them in the chat. And I don't know if I'll have time to answer them right away, but I'll definitely stick around and we'll get to some of those questions at the end. So the first thing we want to do when we're talking about lawn watering is we want to keep in mind deep and infrequent, right? Some folks around the Austin area, especially out in the hill country, don't really have a whole lot of depth of soil. So it's kind of hard to water deeply. I'm sorry for you folks, but there are a lot of pockets where we do have some good depth of soil. So, and what we want to do is we want to push those roots down deep, right? So if we water less often, we're pushing that water down deeper, and that is going to give our turf grass that drought avoidance that we really want. We want it in that hardiness. We want it to be able to sustain, so we don't have to put a lot of inputs in it. We don't have to put a lot of extra water into it, right? So just deep and infrequent. When you think about a golf course, they mow all the time. They usually have a pretty shallow root system, but they're managing the heck out of that thing, right? We're talking home lawns. And there's no reason why anybody needs to have a lawn that is groomed like a golf course. That is an impractical use of turf for sure. And then when we are watering, we want to utilize the cycle and soak method. I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with this, but this is an age-old method that really helps push water deep down into the soil, right? Again, we're looking for that drought avoidance. We're looking for that root structure. We're looking for that stability and that hardiness of that turf grass. So, and cycle and soak is just put a little bit of water on, push it down into the soil, put a little bit more water on, push it down into the soil. When you think about what the majority of Texas has, which is a clay soil, if you think about the infiltration rate or the rate that clay soil takes up water, it's around 1/4 of an inch an hour, right? That's pretty slow. And you think about our standard irrigation system or our typical spray sprinkler system that we use, right? Those can put out about 2 inches of water an hour, right? So that just doesn't add up. That doesn't balance. So if we try to put 30 minutes worth of water onto our clay soil, what are we going to get? We're going to get runoff. We're going to get a lot of it, right? So we want to cycle and soak. We want to take that 30 minutes and we want to break that up into at least at a minimum 2, maybe 3 run times. So we want to keep pushing that water in, minimize the amount of runoff that we actually have. And one of the other things that we really want to do, okay, this is important, is we want to know how much our sprinkler systems actually put out, right? The days of just running it for 20 minutes a station or running it for 30 minutes a station, the kind of set it and forget it, those days have got to go away, right? We've got to know a little bit more about what our sprinkler systems are actually doing. How much do they apply when we run them? And one way to do that is catch can test, right? So catch can, you can go to the Aggie bookstore and you can get some fancy Aggie catch cans, or you can just use any flat-sided can. Tuna can, cat food can, coffee mug like this, as long as it has a flat side, right? It has to have a flat side, because if you get something that's conical shape, then there's all kinds of math that goes into like calculating the opening and the bottom and all that stuff. And most of us repressed all that math a long time ago. So we want to keep it simple, keep it easy. And essentially what we're doing is we're going to put these cans out in whichever sprinkler zone we want to test. And really, we need to do all of them, but we're really talking about the lawn here. So, and we want to run our system for a few minutes. Okay. And then we want to definitely make note of that time we run it. And then we want to go back and we want to use a ruler. We're just going to use a ruler, drop it down into the can. We're going to measure how much water is in each can, right? And that is basically going to give us our precipitation rate. So we're going to know how long it takes for us to water our grass. And we're going to base everything on 1 inch of water, okay? 1 inch may be a little bit excessive for our turf grass. We don't normally get up that high as far as a recommendation goes, but it makes the math super easy, right? So just like using a flat-sided can, we want to keep things easy as we can. So let me show you why we want to do that. We want to use watering recommendations for our turf grass, right? We don't want to just water 20 minutes. We don't know how long the water is going to run, right? We don't know how much water we're going to put out on our system if we run it for 20 minutes unless we've done the catch can test. So once we know that information, right, now we can set our sprinkler systems up for 1 inch per week at 100% of our seasonal adjust. And that'll make sense here in just a second. And then we can go to like the Texas ET network. This is the Texas Evapotranspiration Network. And we can actually get watering recommendations on a weekly basis. So we know exactly how much water we need to replace that our plants lost, right? So evapotranspiration is essentially combining evaporation and transpiration. So evaporation is the loss of moisture through the ground, and transpiration is the loss of moisture through the plant surface. So we put those things together based on a bunch of different weather conditions and a bunch of really big math. We come up with a coefficient, so we know how much water our plants have lost, and we know how much water we need to replace, right? But we can't follow that instruction unless we know how much our sprinklers put out, right? So you go to the Texas ET Network, you can set up a profile. It's going to ask you a few little easy questions, right? This is the recommendation that I just received today for watering for this week for the Dallas Center, which is essentially in Plano, right? And you can see I put in my plant coefficient. It gives you prompts for all of that stuff, but you can see my watering requirement is actually 0. Why is that? Because we got a bunch of rain, so there's no need to water, right? No need to water. And this is really handy during this time of year, right? Because we have had an abnormally dry fall so far coming up to this point, and we may have a pretty dry winter. But even though our grass has gone dormant, our plants have gone dormant, there are things moving around in the soil, right? The roots are still growing, are still a little bit active. We don't want to dry that out totally. We want that grass to come back in the spring without a whole bunch of extra inputs, right? So we're going to want to apply a little bit of water if we're not getting it from Mother Nature. In this case, we got it from Mother Nature. And then one other thing I wanted to point out on here, if you look at the bottom of this slide, you can see there is a recommendation that we'll get to in just a minute on another slide that's going to come in handy. We've done our catch can test. We know we want to use the cycle and soak method to water. We know how much our sprinkler system puts out, right? So now we've got our watering recommendation. So now we're good to go on the watering, right? We know we're not going to be overwatering. We're not going to be underwatering. So, but now we need to talk about mowing, right? So mowing seems like such a simple practice, but every time you mow, we're putting stress on our grass, right? And what happens when we stress our grass? It needs more inputs. It needs more water because, well, it's stressed out. Just like us, we get stressed out, right? We need more wine or we need more beer. So same thing with the turf grass, okay? We're trying to minimize those stresses, but we also don't want to cut it too short. We don't want to leave it too long because there's this thing called the root to shoot ratio, right? So you let it grow longer, right? And your roots get a little bit deeper, right? And again, we're trying to get those roots deep because we're looking for that drought avoidance, and we're going to get that with that deep rooting. But there's a point to how high we really want to let our grass grow before it becomes soft or starts laying over or starts having too much stress in its own right. So here's the basic chart for watering, right? These are kind of the recommended cut heights for most of our turf grasses that we're going to have, which is going to be a warm season turf grass, right? So we want to stay within these recommended mowing heights, right? This is where our grass is going to perform the best. And again, we're looking for performance. If we get good performance, then what do we not need to do? We don't need to add extra inputs to it. Make note of this, and there's plenty of this out here, but this is pretty standard as far as recommended mowing heights go. And then throw away the calendar on mowing, right? Don't just mow once a week. And I know this is hard if you're like a mowing company because you have to have a schedule and do that type of stuff. But if you're a homeowner, right, just throw away the calendar and go off of the 1/3 rule. You never want to remove more than 1/3 of the plant or the leaf surface at a time. That's creating stress. When we scalp, that's creating a massive amount of stress. When we go every 2 weeks and we mow, that's creating a massive amount of stress. And it's creating another problem, which we'll get to in a minute too. So you may, like during the summertime when the grass is really growing, right? We may be mowing every 4 days, every 5 days, depending on your situation. But when we get into the fall time, I mean, we're really not mowing hardly at all, every like 2 or 3 weeks. But it's going to follow that curve. And I'll show that to you here in a minute as well. And then when we're mowing, right, if we're following the 1/3 rule, our clippings are pretty small. And we want to follow this. We want to chop and drop. And I'll get to a little bit more of that before, but we want to mulch those clippings. Those clippings are very beneficial. They will provide a lot of good nitrogen back into the soil. Kind of, we call it grass cycling, which I think I'll talk about here in just a few. But there is a time when we want to avoid that. So if you've got any kind of like weeds, like heavy weeds that are flowering, and you don't want to spread those weed seeds, then you probably want to bag those clippings and get rid of that right away. If you have any kind of disease, you don't want to spread the disease. So you're probably not going to want to mulch your grass at that point. And you definitely don't want to do it when it's super wet. So if you can avoid mowing when it's really wet, you definitely want to do that just because it's harmful to the grass. But for the most part, we want to follow the 1/3 rule and we want to drop those clippings down there. We want to put that nitrogen back into the system. We covered watering, covered mowing. Now we're going to cover fertilizing. Do a soil test. That's all I can say about this right now at this point. If you haven't done a soil test, do a soil test. Daphne Richards is your horticulture agent in Travis County. She is a great source of knowledge. If you don't know her yet, you should get to know her and utilize her. Her county office is where you'll drop off your samples for testing, but it is super important, right? So I always talk about this as like a starting point, right? If somebody wants to go on a diet, somebody wants to lose weight, they have to weigh themselves first. Got to get that starting point because you don't know where you're going to go. So you need to know what you're doing. You need to set some goals. You don't want to just fertilize just because that's what the big box stores have stacked up when you walk in the door. You want to know what you need to do for your soil. You don't want to overdo it. Again, nitrogen is a huge contributor to pollution in our rivers and our streams. And that comes from a lot of different sources, but fertilizer is a number one source on doing that. So I like this cartoon. I just kind of threw it in there. I thought it was pretty funny, even though it's kind of has a little bit different of a connotation, but I thought it was pretty cool. So kind of funny, and it makes absolutely perfect sense. We got to know what we're doing. We got to know where we are starting from. With your soil test, right, it's going to give you a lot of information. It's going to give you your macro and micronutrients that are in your soil. And typically what we're going to be looking at, right, is we're going to be looking at the N, P, and K, right? We're going to be looking at the nitrogen, we're going to be looking at the phosphorus, and we're going to be looking at the potassium. Most of our clay soils are good in phosphorus and potassium. We don't really need to add that in for our lawn grass, right? But nitrogen is going to be the number one food for our turf grass. That's going to be the number one thing that we're going to look at. Now, with this, that's going to be your N, P, and K, right? It's going to be right off of the bat. Those are the first things that you're going to have on there. Of course, your pH is going to be on there too, so that's important. We want to make sure that we know what we're doing. So if we need to do any soil amendments for pH, we can do that as well. And then at the bottom of your soil, of your test, right, it's going to give you some kind of recommendation, right? If you're low on nitrogen, it's going to give you a little bit of a recommendation of how much nitrogen to add. Definitely great information to have. They're not that expensive, like $35-$40 for a test. So super easy to do. Highly recommend getting it done. The thing with fertilizing, okay, is timing is absolutely everything with that. We grow warm season turf grass here. So we have really, it's a pretty simple bell curve, right? When it gets hot, the soil warms up, the grass starts to grow, the grass grows. There's more leaf blade area for photosynthesis. It grows even more. It grows deep roots, right? That's pretty much it for our warm season turf grass. But when we want to fertilize is different timing, right, than when we want to do other practices, right? So I'm going to go ahead and throw like a dual purpose products under the bus here. A baseball stadium that is also a concert venue, just do either one of those great. A baseball stadium, it's a baseball stadium, is a great baseball stadium. A concert venue, that's a concert venue, is a great concert venue. So you try to mix too many things in together and you only get a little bit of benefit from each of them. So if we want to do like a pre-emergent type of thing, right? Say we want to battle weeds, the time we put that down is not the time we want to fertilize, right? For you guys in the Austin area, in Central Texas, you're not really putting down any type of pre-emergent. You're putting that down like early March, right? But we're not going to fertilize our grass until it's really actively growing. Probably until after we've mowed it like twice. That's going to be more into the spring, maybe even June if it's been wet, right? So if we're doing a fall fertilization, right, we're doing that sometime in we really want to back up early October, maybe even the end of September. But if we're doing a pre-emergent, again, we want to do that early September. We got to get it to it before the soil starts to cool down. So we want to do, those are two totally separate things we want to do. Now, fertilizing, which is important, is we want to make sure that we're measuring our fertilizer out appropriately. I want to make sure that I'm leaving enough time for Teresa to talk as well too. So fertilizing, this is about as simple as I can make this formula for fertilizing, right? So you have your three big numbers on your fertilizer bag, right? You have your NP and your K. The simplest way to do it is if you've got your recommendation is X amount of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. First thing you need to know is how much lawn area you have, right? So if you don't know, you can go to Google Earth and you can use the measure tool. You can measure it out. You can use a tape measure and walk it off. There's lots of different ways, but that is super duper important. Right? Definitely know how much square footage you have, right? And then with your fertilizer, take this simple formula and apply it to your fertilizer. So in this scenario, got a 3,500 square foot lawn. I want to put 0.5 pound of nitrogen down on there, and the fertilizer I'm using is a 612. So 6% of this bag is nitrogen, right? So we want to convert that 6 to a decimal. So that's what we did here with the formula. That gives us 8.33 pounds per 1,000 square feet. We're doing 3,500 square feet. So we multiply that by 3.5, comes out to 29 pounds, right? This is a 40-pound bag of fertilizer. So we're just not even using the whole bag. Where a homeowner may go wrong is they may just put this whole entire bag out, right? And that is over-fertilization, okay? That is going to cause an issue. We don't need to over-fertilize, right? We can split this bag into 2 fertilizations for the year for sure, right? If we're following that formula. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and measure it out. Simple thing to do, just get a scale, get a bucket, and measure out that fertilizer. Measure out that 29 pounds in that bucket, use a Sharpie marker, and go ahead and mark it. Make a note, do whatever, just save it. If you're using different fertilizers, then go ahead and make different lines, different marks, because don't count on your spreader. Don't count on anything else. Go ahead and do it by weight. It's going to be the easiest and the best way for you to make sure that you're not putting down excessive amounts of nitrogen. So I talked about grass clippings and before, so we're going to get right back to this. Grass clippings are super important. They do not contribute to thatch. A lot of people are like, it's going to give me thatch. It does not. What contributes to thatch is over fertilization, right? Because you have unbalanced the shoot to root ratio. You're now growing your turf grass way too fast. You're having to cut it way too often, and it can't decompose fast enough. That's what's going to contribute to thatch more than anything else, right? But the good thing is, and there's tons of studies that were done on this, when we return the clippings to the grass, we can replace about half of the supplemental nitrogen requirement. So if you're on a program where you've got some heavy traffic on your grass and you're doing Bermuda grass and you're doing 3 or maybe 4 fertilizations a year on there just to keep it going, maybe you're doing a dog park or whatever, right? If you're returning the clippings to the grass, you can eliminate 1, maybe 2 of those fertilizations. That saves money, and that saves our rivers, streams, and creeks, and our fish. There is some bad with the clippings. If you're not following the 1/3 rule, you can get some big piles up. And then, of course, those clippings can move into the environment, and they can definitely move into the environment like this. So I don't know about you guys, but it drives me absolutely bananas when I see mow and blow companies just blowing the clippings out into the grass. Like, 1, it's just, what are you guys doing? Making it somebody else's problem. And 2, do you guys even know where that's going or what kind of impact that's having, right? So again, we need to do a much better job of educating our landscape companies on how just definitely hazardous this is, how bad this is, and just how absolutely ugly it looks when we do this, right? The lawn may look good, but everything else around it just looks absolutely terrible. So that's the good, the bad, the ugly of grass clippings, and that's it. I am done. I've hopefully left plenty of time for Teresa to talk about great plants and lawn alternatives for you guys. So
Dean, that was just perfect. And there were a couple questions, but we do want to stay on schedule, so we're going to save those till the very end. But I just wanted to throw out there with the soil kit or the soil testing, it's not taking it to the extension office, but mailing it to whatever address is on the form. We had a clarification on that. So anyway, next up is Teresa Stevens with Polydog, and she's going to talk about reimagining your lawn. So I am just going to go Turn it over to you, Teresa.
I'm Teresa. I own Polydog Landscapes. I have a master's degree in horticulture, and I've had Polydog Landscapes since 2005 here in the Austin area. My husband and I run it. Mostly now we're a consulting and landscape design and planning company, but we've done everything on all spectrums of landscaping throughout the years that we've been doing it. But today we're going to talk about reimagining the lawns. And of course, the idea behind this is to have less resource intensive landscapes, right? We want to save water. We want to put less down on the lawn, less water down on the lawn. So when you're talking about resource management, water management, you can use xeric plants instead of all lawn. Now, I agree with Dean, lawn is not the enemy. I wouldn't have a job if we didn't do lawn maintenance. So lawn is definitely not the enemy, but you can reduce it. You can have it have a purpose, and which is what I'll talk about next. But the main idea is to use less fertilizers, less pest and disease control products. Going organic helps. It's all natural products. They break down into the soil. They're slow release, low nitrogen, which is great. And the bag that Dean showed in his fertilizing portion was an organic fertilizer, and that's actually the one we use most often. But really reducing your water usage is also going to save you money, right? Because, oh my gosh, Austin water bills can be really, really high. So less lawn you have, less water, and less money you're going to have to put into it, really. That's what it comes down to. The first step that you can do is reduce your turf grass areas, right? Like I say, lawn's not the enemy. But think about where you actually want lawn or where you need lawn. Every lawn area should have a purpose, right? So if there's foot traffic, if it's a path, you can use lawn as pad. If your children are going to be playing sports or you're going to be playing sports, frisbee, soccer, that kind of thing, you need a larger lawn probably for that purpose. But if you really don't have that, but you want some sitting areas or some little meditation areas, or you want to provide food or nectar for wildlife, then you can really bring that lawn in. The easiest way to do that is immediately just to plant your perimeters. Reduce your lawn, shrink it all into the middle, and plant around the foundation of your house. Plant around your fence lines. It also helps prevent your neighbor's grass from coming into your grass. It gives you a barrier. You don't have to worry about maintaining that fence line so much, right? Yeah, so think about what you really want out of your landscape and where you really absolutely positively need or really, really want a lawn that's going to be useful and have a purpose. And then think about your problem areas, because you might say, oh, well, that would be useful and have a purpose to have lawn all the way up in there, except, I mean, you can see from the first larger picture, the irrigation doesn't get great coverage. The sun shades both those corners. Lawn just did not ever want to grow in those corners. So the best thing you can do is just don't let it grow there, right? Just get rid of it. So anywhere you have an area where you're just battling and battling and battling and saying, why won't my lawn grow here? Well, that's because it doesn't want to grow there. So it's kind of the one main rule of landscape design, the right plant for the right place, right? Lawn is not the right plant for the right place in these corners of this particular property. So we shrunk it all in, put some beds in. They still have a lawn, which technically doesn't really have a purpose right there, but they really wanted a lawn. It looks nice though, it's much better. And the one thing you have to think about though, whenever you do this, is irrigation, because you're going to have to change your irrigation. You've shrunk the lawn. The lawn is going to need more water ultimately than the rest of your beds, right? So you want to be able to separate those. Once your beds are established, you can reduce the irrigation on that, but you're going to want to keep and maintain the irrigation schedule for the lawn, and there'll be different schedules. So it does take a little forethought in planning to get this to work right. And then the other thing you can do to help with water resources and saving water is just get rid of your turf grass. I know it's not the enemy, but if you don't need it, why have it? So the one picture on here is sedge. If you want to do something really fun, the natural gardener used to have this great little sedge labyrinth that my kids loved. It's not something easy to do as a homeowner, but I just had to include it because, I mean, why not just get rid of everything and put something fun, right? But more likely, you'd be looking at doing something more like the middle picture where, you know, you have a front yard. People really don't need lawn in the front yard unless you're really hanging out in the front playing soccer or sports or something. Most people do that kind of thing in their backyard. So front lawn's a great opportunity, front yard is a great opportunity to get rid of lawn and showcase your house. We just got rid of all the lawn at this particular house and put in a little parking area along the street. And then everything's just perennials, shrubs, color, native plants, great for bees, butterflies, hummingbirds. It was really nice. It turned out really nice. And the other thing you can do is solve, like I mentioned earlier, your problem areas, right? Total shade, even Amerishade St. Augustine will not grow in total shade. So your shady areas under all your oak trees and that kind of thing, really, you don't need to be trying to put lawn there, right? So you can go with a crazy full ground cover. The one that is in this picture is the round leaf firecracker fern, which I love. After a few years, it will fill an entire area. This started out as 2 4-inch plants, but it's great. It's a wonderful plant. It gets very tall. It's not, you know, it's somewhere that you would walk around, not necessarily through. Those are some things you can do to reduce your lawn, right? So once you've decided that you're going to reduce it, or you've decided, okay, this is how much lawn I'm going to have, you need to think about the fact that you are caring for a monoculture. So a monoculture is any single plant grown in mass, right? It's normally used as an agricultural term, but lawn is definitely considered a monoculture because, like this picture on the left, you're just trying to grow this huge expanse of St. Augustine, right? No other plants growing up in it, just St. Augustine. This is the kind of thing we need to reimagine and kind of get away from just a little bit and become more accepting to weeds, which I do not call weeds. I call them pollinators, pollinator attractors. I mean, you need the biodiversity in your lawns. Otherwise, you're just constantly battling the other plants that are not weeds. So you're pulling clover, you're pulling asters, you're pulling dandelions, or putting down pre-emergence, which I don't recommend. Even if you don't do the pre-emergence, you're out there hand pulling. When really you could just say, you know, this is green, it's got a little flower on it, it's kind of cute, it likes it here, and just let it grow. It's redefining what's pretty, right? Redefining what's beautiful and what is acceptable. And really, sometimes these things should be just in there for encouraging beneficial insects. I get a lot of people, it takes really kind of changing the way you look at something to accept all of the little flowers and everything in the lawn, but I recommend it. But if you absolutely can't do it, that's okay too. We'll talk about taking care of monocultures for a bit. And of course, then I always include or you could just not have a lawn. This is a lovely little house that has no lawn. Again, in the front yard. It's a front yard thing. There's just no reason to have a lawn there. And they have a lot of shade. So this buffalo grass and native grass mixes are tricky. This is another monoculture issue because a lot of people that want to have lawn alternatives still want a lawn look, right? So that's your monoculture problem. It takes a lot of work to have a buffalo grass lawn, and even a native mix lawn like the turfilos and things like that they've come out with that have like little mesquites in it along with the buffalo grass and some other little native grasses that are mowable. They still need to be allowed to get tall, and they still get weed problems. And the worst part of that is with these native mixes and the buffalo grass is you want them to reseed. You want them to reseed themselves, so a pre-emergent is not even an option because then they won't reseed themselves. It's a lot of weeding. It's a lot of dedication. This lawn did not make it after about 6 years. And I think a lot of the buffalo grass lawns that kind of were all the craze in the early 2000s didn't make it. Most of them people just couldn't put the labor really into it because it is a lot of weeding. And even you can see on the picture on the left, that's a little patch of Bermuda grass that just was a constant battle right there. And we dug that out several times, and Bermuda grass, that stuff won't die. It just kept coming back. So finally, we were just like, it likes it here and it's going to stay here. Again, it's a monoculture. So if you want that monoculture look, you're going to have to put a lot of time and effort into it. For plant options, not just for getting a monoculture plant look, but any plants, ground covers, all that, Grow Green has put a great book together that I use almost exclusively, the Native and Adapted Landscape Plants. If you don't have it, you should get it. It's available digitally on the website, and you can pick them up at almost every nursery and probably I always have one near me. It's got great plants. I'm going to talk about a few of them, but honestly, anything that is in that book that's perennials or ground covers can be used as an alternative to lawn. The trick is, if you want that look, you just plant a bunch of it. So it's just mass planting, right? Some of my favorites from the book are the low steppable ground covers. They grow great. It depends on where you're putting them. So the first thing you have to think about is sun. Your sun exposure is pretty important with any ground cover or lawn replacement. Silver ponyfoot likes a lot of sun. It'll take some part shade, but it really needs a lot of sun. And it also looks a little meh in the wintertime, right? But so does your lawn, right? Lawns go dormant. So silver ponyfoot looks a bit dormant in the winter, but in a hard freeze, it might even die all the way back, but it'll come back up in the spring. It's good stuff. Horseherb, the middle one, likes part shade, and that's actually under my trampoline. So that's the perfect environment for horseherb, is under a trampoline. And I let some little wildflowers come up in mine. Of course, that's some Mexican hats in there and some other little things. But it's a wonderful ground cover. It will come up in your St. Augustine in any shady, slightly compacted soil area. And it's a beautiful plant that coexists with your St. Augustine very well. So this is another point where I'm saying, if you have lawn, you don't need to have just lawn. You can let this grow up in your lawn. It's really pretty and it's green. It's just kind of got to wrap your head around that. It's not a weed. It's a beautiful little plant. Mondo grass is another option for deep shade. And these are all steppables, like I said, so you can lightly walk on these. Now, it's not something you can play sports on, or a dog would make a path through it easily, very quickly. So it's not something that... And Mondo grass is really great for deep shade. And speaking of dogs love to lay down in it. It's so cool in the summertime, and they love a little patch of it under the trees, and they will just stay there all day during the heat. It's really nice. Like I said, you can use any plant out of that book. So these are just a few of the medium height ground covers that are in the Native and Adapted Plant book. Frog fruit is a really good one. I did not have a picture of it in the landscape, but it gets about 6 to 8 inches. It likes sun to part shade. It grows pretty straight up, and so it has a different look, and it looks textured. It's nice in a large mass planting in not quite full sun. And I wouldn't give it afternoon full sun, but a lot of sun and some afternoon shade. And then sedges in the middle are like the labyrinth that was at the Natural Gardener, same plant. They do really well it's kind of an assortment, because there's several different types of sedges. Some do better in shade, some do better in sun. So you kind of want to read that when you're deciding on a variety. These are in part shade, and I love it. They're not super steppable because they're clumpy. You want to make a path through these, or like this is just there along the curb instead of trying to keep grass alive along the curb. And it's, shaded too at that particular one. And then for deeper shade, I love pigeonberry. And it's the cutest little ground cover, but it can go dormant in the summer, and it does go dormant in the winter. So it's not true lawn replacement because it's going to be gone in different parts of the time. But you can intersperse it with the horseherb, which I love. And again, maybe not so much monoculture, right? Let's put some other things in. So horseherb does great interplanted with the frog fruit, and it does great interplanted with pigeonberry. And it makes just this cute, adorable green mass. Like I was saying, anything can be mass planted. These are just a few examples. Of course, the one on the right is a drive-through window at Hat Creek, I think. But that's Santalina. And mass planted, it's very moundy and silvery and can be really pretty. It's not something that can be walked on, obviously. It's not steppable. But again, when you've reduced your lawn, you can still have some large expanse areas that don't need to be stepped on. The Santalina is the top right. Top left is just a really tall perennial. It's Russian sage. And I absolutely love it in mass. It looks amazing. And it does have some winter interest with the silver stems on it. It could be very pretty mass planted. And then down below left is mountain pea. And mountain pea is a wonderful ground cover. Gets about 8 to 10 inches tall. Does pretty well all the way sun to shade. Very, very, very drought tolerant and really fills in an area. I love it. It's very soft, has that tiny little flower. You can see it. And then again, you don't have to go with just one plant too. You don't have to do a big giant monoculture planting to replace your lawn, right? The one down there on the right is Artemisia Powys Castle. There are a lot of different kinds of Artemisia. All of them do excellent in full sun. And it's planted along with Purple Heart or Secretia. So you can mix things up a bit and just fill an area. But if you use the taller ones, things like the ones that I just showed you with Artemisia or pigeonberry even, which gets really tall, you're going to need some paths through that if you intend to walk through it because they're not steppable. And so you want to make some pathways. So one of the things you can do is use mulch to make a path. And the one on the left was for little dogs. Now, big dogs, they'll just tear that up. So, it depends on the dog. But if you have little dogs that don't have a whole lot of fur to pick up the mulch, it's perfect for little dogs. And that's in some native grasses. And that just gives them a walk up to their parking area there and back down to their doors. So it's an oddly shaped thing, but that one's very purposeful. And then the middle one, we replaced that whole lawn because lawn, again, even here, all lawn needs some sun. Even St. Augustine. St. Augustine's what used to live there in that middle picture. We took all that out because it just wouldn't grow. It's too much shade. You had the fence right there, their house, and then the neighbor's house was on the other side, and it was just total shade. We took all that out and put a little granite path through it with some shade-loving perennials, and it worked out really great. And then you can also put stepping stones through your paths, of course. I had to include the one with the chickens. This is a job I'm working on right now, actually. And the chickens absolutely love it there. But we're going to put pigeonberry all through there, which I'm really excited about. I've got it on order, but I just wanted to show it because it's adorable. And that's some Turk's cap in the foreground too, which is really great in the shade also and attracts hummingbird. But again, that's not really a ground cover, but that whole front, this one on the far right is we're getting rid of all lawn in the front and it's all going to be perennials and ground covers. Or you can let nature do the work. This is my driveway. It just has whatever volunteers there. So it comes up with some little blue stem grasses. And when the bluebonnets aren't blooming, we just let whatever comes up come up. And there's some yucca in there, and there's some Zexminia, and probably some little coreopsis come up. And it's just very fun. And I don't ever do anything to it except mow it twice a year, maybe 3 times a year or something like that.
Okay, so let's jump back to Dean, if that's okay. Dean, I have 3 questions for you. The first one is, what time of day is optimal to start the watering cycle? The second one is, can you talk about fertilizers and should they have phosphorus in them, or can you talk about no phosphorus fertilizers? And then what about aerating and top dressing as an alternative to fertilizing?
Right,
So
all great questions, and I was typing away on the first one. So the best time to start watering is whenever you need to to get your cycle done before it gets too hot. So, right, you don't want to water overnight because you don't want the water just sitting on the grass overnight. Plus, that puts you into the second watering day if you're under restrictions, which pretty much everybody is. Like around 2 or 3 a.m. is best. This way, it gives it time for the sun to come up and the water to perk down into the soil, and then the sun can dry the leaves. And then, if you need to mow or whatever later on in the day, you're not mowing on wet grass. So I would say, the earlier the better. But definitely not overnight, right? Just absolutely don't do that. So as far as fertilizers go, with phosphorus or no phosphorus, rely on your soil type, your nutrients in your soil. Rely on your test, right? Phosphorus. Generally, our lawns our soils are okay with both phosphorus and potassium in them, so we don't really need to amend that. But it's hard to find a fertilizer that it has a reasonable nitrogen amount that's not overdoing it, right? Just be sure you're using a slow release organic fertilizer. You have a little bit of fudge room there if you're using an organic rather than if you're trying to use some commercial thing. And then just less is more, right? You can always apply again if you need to, but just be easy with it. Don't rely on your spreader calibration because that's never right. Make more passes, going zigzagging across the yard, back and forth, both directions to make sure your coverage is really good on that. And then for top dressing and aeration, yes, aeration may not be necessary. You want to check for that, right? So it takes quite a bit to compact our soils. So if you are aerating, it may not be something that you're doing on an annual basis or a regular basis. It may be something every 2 or 3 years. Just depends on the situation with your lawn, right? What's going on? Do you have a lot of foot traffic? Do you have a lot of, pets or whatever going on with it? And there are quite a bit of studies out right now where we're looking at various top dressing methods. Compost is a great top dressing. It's a great fertilizer. Soil. It may work a little bit faster if you have a compacted soil, but you can just apply it as a top dress. Don't apply more than like a 1/4 inch at a time because you don't want to smother the grass. And don't put it down until after your grass is absolutely actively growing. Don't do anything until your turf grass is actively growing, right? So that's going to be your second or third mowing of the season. At that point, everything is growing really good. It's strong. And then you can go ahead and start doing some of those top dressing materials. But compost is great. I just read a little study that came out in 2021 where they compared several different compost varieties as a top dressing, and then also a fertilizer, and over a 3-year period of time. And obviously the fertilizer provided the best color input, but it provided no benefit to the soil whatsoever. Whereas the fertilizers or the compost varied depending on the variety of it, which was kind of interesting to me, but it had a good green up color, and it also provided a lot of benefit to the soil profile, which is ultimately what we want, right? We want to feed the soil, let the soil feed the plant. We're not really looking for that rush of growth out of the plant like a fertilizer gives us. It's a system. We want everything to work together. It's all one, ecosystem, right? Everything has got to go together at the same time to be functional.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, you did. That's Perfect. Incredible. So we have quite a few questions, more questions. So I am just going to do them one by one. But this one I know you can answer, Teresa. In that picture where you said, eliminate lawns and you had the before and after picture, can you give us an idea about what the cost was to redo that from start, from
not the one with the patio, but the second one with the corners and the little path around to the back? It's kind of hard to say because that job was much more entailed than just that before and after picture. We did the whole backyard and we did the other side of that driveway as well. So, usually with a full redo, you're looking anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000 for something like that. But like I say, it really depends on how extensive you're going to do it. It maybe just that little right side of the driveway with the labor to dig out, because we dug out all that grass. That probably would have been close to $4,000 or $5,000 just for that little side over there, because and that's just by dividing the whole job by 4.
Yeah. It's expensive is the answer, right?
Yes, it's expensive.
Okay, the next question was from Angelita, and I'm not sure if I'm asking the right question because that wasn't super clear to me, but the question was, how do you control growth onto the lawn of decorative stuff that replaces grass?
So like if you have, let's say, Greg's mist flower that's just spreading like mad and starts getting out into the lawn, is that maybe?
I think.
Yeah, that's just thinning and weeding. And I mean, a line trimmer, it depends on the plant. If it's a really spreading ground cover, you can just line trim into the bed as well as the lawn. But if it's a more of a lateral root spreader like Greg's mist flower is, then you have to either dig it out or just keep cutting it back.
Okay, thank you so much. And then there was a question about, do you have any plant recommendations for under pecan trees? And then someone else asked under Monterey oak. I did put in the chat that the trees would really rather have you mulch them around the base. But someone did specifically ask about what you could plant under a pecan tree, because they're known for, stuff in their leaves that keeps other things from.
Exactly. Pecans and the evil China berry do the same thing. But you could, that's more of a just try, hit or miss, because it really depends on your soil. And it depends on how much water you're going to be giving it under the pecan tree too. But I have used, I've used horse herb under the pecan tree. I'm trying to think of a couple of jobs. Horse herb did really well under the pecan tree. Some perennials, the majestic sage and the other shade tolerant blue sages did well under that pecan tree too. So it's kind of just try different things.
Yeah, and remember when you have a tree that the roots are mainly in the top 8 to 12 inches of the soil. So if you start digging in there, then you're going to disrupt the tree too.
And that's a good point, because you also don't want, normally I'm like, oh, raise your beds. Do not put a lot of soil added onto underneath a tree. So you don't want to raise beds and in order to dig when you're underneath the drip line of a tree, which extends all the way to the canopy. You don't want to build that up a whole lot. No more than an inch in a year would you want to add to that.
Yeah, because it smothers the root.
Exactly.
And then this probably is, well, it could be for either one of you. What's your recommendation for removing grass? Do you recommend a sod cutter, or do you recommend covering it and, doing solarizing and that kind of stuff?
I do a lot of that, and it depends. Sod cutter's great for St. Augustine, and I've never had anyone say, I don't want this zoysia here and take it away. So I've never cut that out other than to enlarge beds, and we just dig that out with a shovel. But Bermuda grass, I would recommend solarizing with the black cover through a summer if it's somewhere where you can do that. Either that or dig, and dig. Because if you leave a little root of Bermuda grass, it's coming back.
Yeah, definitely. That's the classic extension answer is it depends. So,
yes.
yeah. It's the difference between just having stalens, on the grass and having stalens and rhizomes, which is what Bermuda grass has. So, and that's why it just gets into everything and grows everywhere and takes a lot of effort to get rid of it. That's why it's a great grass for sports fields, because it is hardy and durable.
Yes.
Well, I was going to throw that out there. And someone had asked about keeping zoysia out of your beds, which is kind of the same. It's just not as aggressive. But Bermuda grass has a split personality. When you want it to be tough in sports fields, you're happy that it's growing. When it's next to your flower bed, it's invasive. So we actually have it listed as an invasive in one part of the plant guide and as recommended in the other part. But it depends.
And
right?
It's so invasive. And only until this year, I have not been recommending it for years and years and years and years and years until now, because we're so dry. And really, with this drought and water restrictions and only being able to water once a week, Bermuda grass is really the only thing that's going to really survive that well. Well,
they did have someone did have the question about how to keep zoysia grass out of your beds. I mean,
digging.
Really physically.
Yeah. Oh, and one thing I do when you have a bed, don't, if you have the metal edging along the bed, don't let your grass grow right up to that metal edging. I keep like a compacted soil area that's about the width of your foot or palm of your hand. So like that, and just keep that completely empty and line trim that whole, 4 inches. And in front, between your edging that holds your mulch in and the soil in on your bed. So between your edging and your lawn, you want this empty spot. And that helps you keep on top of it. Because let's say you miss a couple of weeks, you go out of town, the grass starts growing that way again. But then you can come back and zip it out of there.
Okay, we got a couple more. This is kind of a biggie. When should we plant these and how should we organize our project? I put a link to our landscape design resources page. If you're just starting out, I would suggest hiring somebody to help you. But do you want to answer that, Teresa, as far
now
as...
it's time to plant. Absolutely now. For shrubs and perennials. Now, a lot of people aren't comfortable sometimes planting perennials in the fall because they immediately go dormant and then you worry, oh, did it die? So you kind of have to get your mindset ready for that if you're going to plant perennials now and they're not evergreen. But other than that, yeah, absolutely. Now is the time to plant trees, shrubs, perennials, everything.
And then this one, Dean, I think is for you. What is the best type of sprinkler to use for hose end watering? I'm thinking turf grass.
Yeah. Well, so they're all about the same. If you're using a hose end sprinkler, you can do an oscillating one or you can do the little spinny ones. The key is with the oscillating one, you're going to have to move it a lot because you really don't want to send that spray so high up into the air, right? You're just going to lose it all to wind drift and evaporation. But the big thing is go ahead and do your catch can test with your hose end sprinkler too, because you will be absolutely surprised how long it takes to get any amount of water down with a hose end sprinkler. Some of them have such a slow precipitation rate or application rate, whatever you want to call it, which is really good, especially if you're on a clay soil. But if you're out there running it for like 10 minutes, you may not be doing any good whatsoever. It may just be sitting on the surface and evaporating. So you really want to know, like, how long do I really need to run it to get a good watering with it? So you want to go ahead and do your catch can test, and then they make these great like digital timers that go on your hose bib that you can. A lot of them are Bluetooth too, so you can run it through your phone. But that's a great way that you don't forget that the sprinkler is running, and then you wake up the next morning and you've got a swamp in your backyard, right? But yeah, I mean, they're all over the place. It depends on the size of your hose, the length of your hose, the pressure coming out of your hose bib. I mean, there's so many variables. So go ahead and do your little catch can test on that. It's super easy, and it's kind of fun if you have kids too. They'll get a kick out of doing it. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. There was a question, if Bermuda grass is such a good grass, then why would you want to remove it? And I think we talked about that already. It depends.
It's invasive.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting is with like new houses, right? There's all these codes and ordinances that require a tree or 2 trees to be planted in a front yard. And at first that's great because there's plenty of sunlight. But then in 5 or 10 years, that tree and your neighbor's trees don't just focus on your tree in your yard, but your neighbor's trees are casting a lot of shade on that. And if you're not getting at a minimum 6 hours of sunlight on your turf grass, you are not going to grow a good, healthy stand of turf grass, right? It doesn't matter if it is St. Augustine, Bermuda, whatever, it is going to be, it's going to struggle in the shade. So, and at that point, you're going to need to make some choices for sure on what you want to do. So you're not chasing after trying to grow turf where it's just not going to grow. So, so just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, they love that full sun. The next question is the best place to buy native plants and trees.
The National Garden.
I don't know of any, especially for me. I'm in the Dallas area, but what I can say is just keep asking for them, because if there's no demand for it, the growers can't reasonably produce them and grow them, right? So just keep asking for them, keep asking for them, keep asking for them, and just create that demand, because the more we can get available, the easier it's going to be to find them.
When should we plant turf grass? Maybe that's the last one.
So it's really dependent on the soil temperature, right? You want that soil temperature to be up in the 60s before you really start planting it, because you need to get the roots to grow, and you need to get it to take hold. Really, spring is probably the best time, but you can do it in the fall if you're doing a small amount, but you got to hustle on it, and you got to really get it in the ground. Just make sure you're doing all your preparation work. If you're doing turf grass, or if you're having somebody plant turf grass for you, just make sure that they're really getting rid of all of the weeds. They're really doing a good job of amending the soil if necessary. They're really starting you off on the right foot. Don't just throw sod down, because that's what happens with a lot of these new construction homes. They're just throwing sod down on top of backfill, and it's just a battle from the onset how to correct that. If you want to have good, healthy turf grass, you got to start with a good, healthy soil, and that's going to eliminate a lot of your problems. And don't try so hard to have the monoculture. Armyworms love a monoculture. Leave a few weeds are okay, or even if you get some other turf grass mixing in there, it's going to look great. You'll just beat your head against the wall trying to have this absolute perfect lawn. It's just not necessary.
Yeah. And that is a perfect segue to wrapping this up. But I always say I'm not anti-turf, I'm pro-soil.
Yes.
Yes.
Because, if you have decent soil, your turf is going to have a whole lot better chance of making it through our challenging conditions than if it's, rock and then some bad soil and then turf grass. Just lots of problems. Yeah. So I just wanted to thank the speakers again, and I am positive to our audience, if you have further questions, that they would be happy to speak with you outside of this. The Grow Green staff is also available. We will have this video up on our Watershed YouTube site. Katie put a couple links in the chat to that. And then the final ask is, if you would please answer our 3 or 4 question survey. Katie, will you throw it in there one more time at the end? And did your speakers have anything else you want to say to wrap up? I thank you so much for being here with us today.
It was fun.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for being here too. Yeah.
So.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us today. We super appreciate it, and we do really value your input. So we do hope that you'll take our survey.